my book babies that have come out into the world within the past few years. This one came out in 2014. It's the first one in the series of Breakable Things. This one was definitely a labor of love. It was never intended to be published. I just started writing it when my first son was born, because I went from being a teacher and having 160 students to suddenly having just one kid who was a tiny dictator and screamed and cried and wouldn't let me turn on a light and wouldn't let me watch TV because he was that crazy. So the only thing that I had to keep me company were the characters in these books, which seems really morbid, that I decided to write a story about dead people. And that's not a spoiler. Everybody in the story is dead when the story starts. I blame it on the music that I was listening to at that time. I was listening to a lot of Muse and Imagine Dragons, and the theme and the tone of the music I was listening to, I feel like really kind of put me in that mindset. And these characters just came to life, and I decided to put them down on, not paper, put them on screen, because I typed it. I never wrote any of it on paper. So when Breakable Things was done, the first version was 800 pages, because I didn't think that I would ever give it to somebody to read, and I gave it to somebody and cringed for the weeks that it took them to read it, and they said, I think these characters, other people need to meet them, so why don't you do something with it? We went from there. But I'll talk about the story a little bit more, because I know I don't have a lot of time, and I will talk and talk and talk and talk and talk. So Breakable Things, the main character, Alex, had Ehlers-Danlos syndrome when she was alive, which is a tissue disorder. So she had type 4 EDS, which means that her organs could rupture at any point, which is why her mother died in childbirth, because her uterus ruptured, which is not fun to talk about. But the heart is an organ, so Alex, you know, it's a slippery slope when she's alive. So when she's dead, all of a sudden she has all these strengths that she didn't get to experience. So she's almost more alive after she dies, and she enters this mental afterworld where, you know, the longer she's dead, the more she sees, the more open her mind becomes, the more she believes, and the more things that can exist, which is pretty cool for her. But she quickly discovers that this world is not as perfect as it might seem from the get-go. And I don't know how deep I want to get into it before I start talking about the second one, but she is somebody very important that she resembles kind of the, oh, it's nice to meet you. Thanks for coming by for a little bit. That's okay. She resembles, I guess we'll call her a former civil rights leader from the dead. So it was a character who decided that she wanted to kind of start this movement for the living that can see the dead and the living that have the same powers as the dead. And she died. She was a martyr in a sense. So she was almost like the Martin Luther King of the afterworld, where she was trying to get all of these rights for the living, but they killed her. So my main character, Alex, resembles this slain character. So she's going to have a lot of issues. So in book 2, that leads me into this one, which kind of goes into that movement where it's like the living versus the dead. How they might, which side does she want to go to? She kind of straddles the line of living and the dead, because she still knows people that are alive that can see the dead, and it gets kind of tricky through there. I don't want to keep talking too much. You know, I could talk and talk and talk and talk. So any questions about the books before we get into everything else? Yes.
Are you writing a third?
The third is done. I turned it in last summer. It's not good, and it still is going through the editing phases. I had to write it when I was pregnant, and I have no brain when I'm pregnant, so hopefully that won't happen again. And so the third book, I love the way that the story goes, but I know that I'm going to have so much more coming back to me. It's supposed to come out at the end of this year, so we'll see how that goes. I'm excited about it, but not. I'm excited about the idea of it, but I know it's a lot of work. It's a labor of love. Other questions? It can be about what's in the book or about, right? Yeah.
Is it like really bloody gory, or is it just like it goes into basic details on the diseases and things?
Well, it can't be too bloody gory because they're already dead. So
right.
When
well,
it
like,
talks about
like the flashback kind of thing, like.
I mean, they're not too much because I didn't want to scare. I know that a lot of the people that have read the book are adults, so I really shouldn't be too worried about it. But I know, I mean, I've had 10 or 11-year-olds come up to me and say they love the book. So I'm like, I don't want to scare you. But in the second one where it talks a little bit, I don't remember if it's the second or third one now since I've been, I mean, you guys can probably tell me since you haven't read the third one. It goes into a little more specifics about the LaSalle brothers and how they died, since their death was a lot more gory than, Alex's dying in a car accident. Chase has, he has symptoms of PTSD because he's still, his mind is still alive even though his body isn't. So, thinking that you have to live on after seeing your brothers die around you and then you dying in the same crash and your parents died in the same crash, and he's, having to relive it, and his mind is that much more, it's that much stronger in death. So the PTSD is amplified, which isn't fun for him. And I know it touches upon that a little bit in book 2, and maybe it's book 3 where it goes into depth a little bit more, but it does talk about how all these characters died. So
I was just curious. It doesn't really bother me, but like in general, I know some people are bothered.
Yeah, I wouldn't be like his eyeball rolled across the road. Nothing like that. Yeah, that would be kind of nasty. But even the scenes in the books where you could say, this is kind of a scary scene. I don't feel like, even in the first book at the end of it where some people say, okay, it had my heart going a little bit, I don't feel like it was too scary. Like the scene at the end of the first book where they're in the asylum and they're wondering where that banshee is, and it is, you feel like the feet dragging across the floor and the lights are going in and out, and some people said, okay, I had my heart going, but it didn't scare me too much. I'm like, okay, good, because that wasn't the intention. When the book first came out and people see the cover, they thought it was a horror novel, and some people didn't like it because of that. They're like, I picked up the book thinking it was going to be scary. I'm like, read the back and you would know it's not. But yeah, other questions about them? And it can be about where the book's going to go, or it can be about something that's already in there. Or I can just keep yapping. What do you guys think? Anything specific? We can talk about characters.
Is it something you'd like to see turned into a movie one day?
It's a good question. I don't know. I think most people say, yeah, that would be so cool, but I think unfortunately it would either be really expensive or really cheesy because of the things that she sees and the way that it is. Think about the budget for a movie like The Matrix or Inception, which is kind of the sort of mental things that she sees. Like buildings can kind of, wave in and out or crumble right in front of her, and then she might look again and it's back there. Or she walks down a street and it looks normal one day, and then the next day all of a sudden there's another street going off of it, and then another one, and there's a stairway going up to the clouds, and she might go up there and try to see, or she might be like, I'm not going there. I think it would be expensive, and I don't think they would budget another YA unless it was
They're
divergent.
so popular these days, though.
They are, but there are so many of them that now they're
true.
starting to say, they've been saying for years that Supernatural's on its way out, and it just keeps coming back.
It's on season 11 right now.
That's
Supernatural genre, I'll put it that way.
Oh, okay.
So
I'm at the show.
Anyone, I know it's a good show.
Yeah.
Anyone trying to sell a book right now that is supernatural is having a hard time. Which I guess that's good for me that I was able to get it in 2012, which is when the contract was sent and the deal was made, that it was that long ago. But I keep hearing from people that they say, editors keep saying they don't want any more paranormal, they don't want any more supernatural, it's on its way out. And I'm like, I don't see that happening. It just keeps getting bigger and bigger, but I guess they think that it's tapped out because first it was the vampires, and then it was werewolves, and then it was, ghosts with books. They haven't touched upon ghosts too much within movies, but I feel like ghost movies have been played out anyway. But that was a problem I ran into with these also, where people are like, I don't really want to read a ghost story. And I'm like, it's not really a ghost story. It's not your typical, like, ghost in the attic rattling chains at all. It's more so about these characters and a mental world. So, which is why it's fun. I can break my own rules. So this series is fun to write because if I go back and think, okay, what did I say the rule for this was? Yes, I have to remember that, but I can change things as much as I want to because her world changes the longer she's dead, because she sees more and she experiences more, learns more about it, which is where Jonas comes into play. I know you guys are talking about perspective when Read Across America comes around next month, and I'm really excited about that because perspective in these books was so important. When I first wrote Breakable Things, it was only in Alex's perspective, and then I realized that I wanted to do so much more with it because you're so limited when you just write from one character. And we were talking about this a little bit a few minutes ago, talking about the Hunger Games and how I had talked to students that said, oh yeah, I was so worried Katniss would die, but the entire book is from her perspective. You knew she wasn't going to die in any one of those books because there wouldn't be a story anymore. So that was what I ran into when writing Breakable Things. I was like, because yes, these people are dead, but they're not immortal. They can still die. And, that's talked about in the first book where you know, the mind can expire. The mind's not going to live forever either. It's almost like they're just given these chances after the body dies. They still have the mind, but the mind can also die as well. I mean, their soul will still be okay, so they'll still go somewhere, which is why, to quote her teacher that she is in the room with after she dies, there aren't just two options. It isn't just living and dead. There are other options out there. So I didn't want to get too deep into that because I didn't want people to think that I was getting religious on them. So she got out of that classroom pretty quick to go into that mental after all. But yeah, that's why I introduced the other perspectives. Every once in a while throughout the novel, you have Jonas's perspective or you have Chase's perspective. And Jonas is such a jerk, but people love him. I get emails all the time from people that say, is Jonas going to be okay? Or there was a quote on I don't know where it was, if it was on Instagram or I don't know, where people said, is anybody else rooting for Jonas in this? I'm like, ooh, no, he's so bad. He's not bad, but Jonas only cares about himself. What are you laughing about?
That's like
you
J.K.
like Jonas.
Rowling.
You like Jonas.
That's like J.K. Rowling's opinion on Draco Malfoy. Like people rooting for him.
And I loved Malfoy, yeah, because I think sometimes those characters feel the most real because they have so many flaws, and people are afraid to give too many flaws to the main character because people won't like them. So, yeah, but perspective's important, and Jonas's perspective gets more important as the books go on because he leaves and goes and does his own thing. And because of that, he gets more information than Alex and the others get. So he's able to kind of fill us in on things that people don't want Alex to know because she's isolated in that city. So he becomes a lot more important. But, he's such a jerk. He loves himself. We all know people like that. They just love themselves more than they love everybody else. And maybe that's why they like him so much. I can relate to it a little bit, which is all right. There's times when you need to be selfish, and that's okay. Other questions? Daisha, I know you can't stay too long, so you can go. Do you have cheer today?